Dear audience, I'm Dr. Hui-Chung, the chairman of Freed Medical Technology and the CDO of China Biomedical and Technology Applications Association. Welcome to HATV program titled Zeidman Software Forensics SAFE on IP. Today we are very honored to have the software forensic expert, Mr. Zeidman, to share his experience on Lindell Cyber Symposium. Software forensics is the science of analyzing software source codes to determine whether intellectual property infringement occurred. Mr. Zeidman has developed the algorithms, technology, and procedure for code suit, which has been widely used in over 100 cases. Mr. Zeidman has been a consultant and testifying expert on over 22,050 cases involving billions of dollars of intellectual property. I was told you attend Mike Lindell's Cyber Symposium and the rumor about Mike Lindell's with the 2020 US presidential election. Would you mind telling us why did you decide to attend and what have you found? What data you were given and how did you know it was bogus? Did Lindell and his company respond? Do you think there was voter fraud in the 2020 US presidential election?
Thanks for inviting me to talk about this very significant issue. Well, if you watch cable television in the United States, you're bound to come across Mike Lindell. He's created a product called My Pillow, and it's a pillow. It's a special pillow. My wife has one. She sleeps very comfortably on it. It has special properties, allegedly, that make it softer and more fluffy and more comfortable. And he's on TV selling his pillows all the time, and he's made a lot of money off his pillows. I also have his slippers, and he has bathrobes and sheets. And the interesting thing is that he is also a very big supporter of former President Donald Trump, former US president. And in the 2020 election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, there were rumors that the election was fixed. There were rumors that China had influenced the elections and even had changed votes, had hacked into voting machines to change votes because the rumor was that China preferred Joe Biden to Donald Trump. And so Mike Lindell claimed to have proof that China, the government of China, had hacked into US voting machines and actually changed votes. Well, Mike Lindell decided to hold a cyber symposium where he said he was going to release the data and prove that China had hacked into the US voting system. He called this the Cyber Symposium, and it was going to be held in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And he had made some announcements on television. He had made some announcements in podcasts and interviews with various people. And so I found out about it that way. Well, I wasn't initially planning on attending at all, but I started getting calls from friends who told me, Bob, you are the premier forensic analysis expert in the country, maybe in the world, and you should be at this symposium. Now, Mike Lindell was offering a $5 million prize for anyone who could prove that his data was bogus, that his data showing Chinese hacking into the election system was fake. And friends said to me, you should go because you could win $5 million. And my response initially was, if somebody's offering $5 million, they must be very confident that what they have shows fraud, shows hacking, or at least he believes it shows hacking. And I told them that analysis of this kind of data could take weeks, if not months. So the symposium was over 3 days. You had 3 days to prove that he was wrong, and I said that it's just not possible for me to prove that he's wrong in 3 days. That's just not enough time. But then, as friends keep talking to me, I decided that, well, this would be an interesting historic event. Either he will show that China influenced the American election, which would be historical, and maybe the election results would have to be changed. Or, at the very least, he would introduce some interesting data. There would be a lot of news about it, and there would be a lot of interesting people at this symposium. So I decided to fly out to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and attend the symposium. But when I got there were two rooms. The room on the left was a large room with a stage in the front and a big screen with data going by on it. And in the back were television cameras from news organizations. And there were about 200 people listening to various people talk, supposedly about the election data, but really it was mostly Mike Lindell himself talking. And he would invite people up to the stage to talk, but mostly he would talk over them. But in any case, on the right side of this hall, there was a guard at a door. And if you had been invited as a cyber expert, as I had, then you could go into one of those rooms and obtain the data that proved the hacking, allegedly, and we would be able to review that data. Well, what was interesting is all of the experts, there were two rooms, and I would say about 20 or 30 experts in these rooms examining data. It took us a while to download it. It was a lot of data. But all of us were scratching our heads and saying, this is not packet data. Mike Lindell had claimed that he had some computers that could capture data coming from China to our voting machines. And when we looked at the data, there was nothing that looked like packet capture data. And so I started using my forensic tools, my forensic knowledge. I started using packet capture analysis tools and running it on the files that we were given. And then at one point, and nothing was coming up. And then at one point, I said, I'm going to open these files in a text editor. One was a file of hex numbers, base 16 numbers. And I started looking at them and I said, these, I could convert these to binary. And I had a tool that I'd written for some process I needed to do years ago. And I ran the tool to turn text representations of hex into real binary. And so I got a new file. And then I opened up that file in a text editor and I saw commands. And given that I've been doing computer work for 50 years, actually, I recognize these commands as what's called rich text format that represents a word processing document. In other words, these were commands to format a simple word processing document. And although this language, this programming language, this markup language was very old, Microsoft Word still reads it. So I opened these files in Microsoft Word, and lo and behold, one of the files was actually a table of what looked on the left like IP addresses, the addresses of computers connected to the internet. And on the right were just a bunch of numbers from, I think, 1 through 7, which are meaningless. Doesn't show any hacking, doesn't show packet data, but it was curious. And then I did the same process for some other files, and they turned into hundreds or thousands of pages of gibberish. It looked as if somebody had just been typing away, or maybe there was a program to create random characters and put that in a Word document. And then someone had obviously reversed the process or done the process in reverse that I had just done and created what looked like sophisticated hex data. There were some other files. There was a PDF that it was just a diagram of a generic voting machine process. There was a video of someone debugging a program that didn't have anything to do with anything. And there was a giant binary file that it turns out if you ran some special process, this came out later, it turned into a spreadsheet, but they also gave us the spreadsheet. And none of this was packet data, none of this was related to the election. In fact, many of the files were created just days before the symposium. So I was really surprised, but I could actually prove that all of the files were not related to the election. So what I did was I quietly packed my things up. I told everyone in the room where the cyber experts were working, I said, I'm going to go back to my hotel and think about this. And then I walked back to the hotel. I had to cross a highway. And as I'm crossing this highway, I took out my phone and I called my wife and I whispered into the phone. I said, think about what you want to do with $5 million. Well, I wrote up a report, a very detailed report. I submitted it to the US Copyright Office to make sure that I had a record with a timestamp that could prove that I had created the report and done the analysis. And then I'm simplifying a bit. There was more files given to us over the next 2 days, and I supplemented my report. And then at about an hour before the symposium ended, which was the deadline for submitting a report, I submitted it on a flash drive to someone who works for Lindell's company, I believe, or was associated with Lindell. And then I took a ride to the airport and flew home. But I never heard from Lindell. So I got in touch with some lawyers and we decided to sue Mr. Lindell because he had promised me the $5 million if, to anyone who could prove that his data was bogus, that it did not have anything to do with the 2020 election. It did not show hacking from China, and I had proved that. So I hired some lawyers and we went to arbitration. Well, the arbitration was interesting. Basically, Mr. Lindell and his witnesses and the expert he hired couldn't explain exactly what the data was. And the main argument of theirs was that we don't have to tell you what it is. You have to prove what it's not. And they said, you haven't proven it to 100%. I had to sign an agreement to see the data, and the agreement said I had to prove it with 100% perfection. And I argued that in legal documents, 100% is not mathematical 100%, because that's not reasonable. Legal documents have to be reasonable. And, there can always be, and I said this, someone could always say, well, aliens came from space and they used their mind control to make people not see the data that's really there. That wouldn't be a reasonable explanation. But, someone could argue that if you didn't take that into account, then you haven't proven it for 100%. So Lindell's people actually made arguments like that. And they argued that, for example, some of the data had the words Trump and Biden representing the presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And they said, therefore, it's related to the election and I lose. So fortunately, I waited 3 months after the hearing that was just this last January. And I got a notice that the arbitrators had made their decision. And they basically said that I was right. I had reasonably proved to 100% that Mike Lindell's data was fake and that I was owed the $5 million. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever see the $5 million. Mr. Lindell is being sued by the voting machine companies for something like $1 billion. There are 2 voting machine companies that are suing him, each one for $1 billion. And the problem is his data is bogus. And not only that, if the voting machine companies can't show that the data is bogus, which I'm sure they can, but they can look at the records from my case and see exactly what I've done, and they can bring that up in their case because my records are all public. Mr. Lindell asked for them to be kept confidential, and the arbitrators denied that motion. The arbitrators said that Mr. Lindell was going around the country making these public statements on American cable companies and news shows and on the internet, so there was no reason to keep it confidential. So everything that occurred at my arbitration, all my proof, all the arguments are now public. I feel that these companies are probably going to win their cases against Mr. Lindell, and I'm afraid he won't have any money left to pay me in a very short time. I think there was voter fraud in the 2020 US presidential election because I believe that every human activity has some fraud. It would be naive and silly to think that the election did not have fraud. I don't know how much fraud there was. I don't know if the fraud was enough to change the results of the election. I think that it's very unlikely that there was hacking into the voting machines. And I know for certain that Mike Lindell does not have any proof of voter fraud. Well, what I plan to do if I do get the money is I actually want to put it into a organization. I want to find an organization that is doing work to enhance voter integrity and make sure that American elections and elections around the world are true and correct. So I want to find a nonprofit that is working to make elections more secure, more correct, and that people have confidence in them. In the United States, people are losing confidence in the voting process. So I'd like to contribute at least some of the money I get, if I get it, to an organization that will make people feel better that elections are correct and the votes were counted correctly and the results are correct.
Thank you, Mr. Zeidman, for your comprehensive explanation and sharing. Mr. Zeidman is the president and the founder of Zeidman Consulting, that provides engineering consulting to law firms regarding intellectual property disputes. He is also the president and the founder of Software Analysis and Forensic Engineering Corporation, aka SAFE, which is the leading provider of software IP analysis tool. He is also the author of the book titled The Software IP Detective's Handbook: Measurement, Comparison, and Infringement Detection. Dear audience, please do come back for Zeidman Software Forensic and SAFE on IP on HATV. Do not miss the opportunity to sharpen your skills and enhance your proficiency for career competence. Thank you.